Making the Brain Your Ally, how brain science is empowering the next generation of women leaders. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, John Kuntz, and welcome to Boardroom Bound, the Disruptor special series on not-for-profit leadership, purpose, and giving back. For those that are new to the show, the Disruptor series is your blueprint for groundbreaking innovation. We started the podcast in December of 2022. Our vision was to go beyond conventional wisdom by confronting the status quo and exposing the raw power of disruptive thinking. And today's guest embodies that spirit in every sense of the word. Sarah Jekyll, the founder and executive director of Democracy, where she is disrupting the conditions that cause young women to opt out of leadership in the first place. Today, we'll explore how understanding and applying brain science during the critical high school years helps young women make their minds their allies so they can confidently unlock their ambition and thrive in any leadership situation. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you so much, John. Glad to be here.
This is a fascinating topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join the show. But before we get going, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background, your education, your experiences? How did you get here? Feel free to start anywhere you want.
I love that question because I didn't know that I would end up talking brain science with you today when I first started out. So I was a social worker. I did direct service social work to our unhoused community dealing with mental illness. I got a master's in public policy to fight for them because it made me very angry the way they were treated. And then I got a military master's in social work. And I got a military master's in social work because at the time, the military were the only people looking at PTSD and specifically how brains can recover and even thrive in tremendous adversity. So this was, I thought, my path. I was very excited. And then in 2014, I was diagnosed with a brutal autoimmune disease called psoriatic arthritis. And I was told by a very kind rheumatologist that I would never work again, that it wasn't fair. It was just the nature of the illness. And John, I did live for 2 years on a couch with my puppy dog, Max, but I am stubborn and I am academic. So I had studied brains going through adversity academically, and now my brain was going through adversity. So I immersed myself in studying the neuroscience behind the brain, behind trauma, and looking at the different modalities that research has developed to help human beings going through difficult times. At the time, I was doing it just so that I could show up the way I wanted to in the face of this catastrophe. When the election of 2016 happened, I said, I am not sitting on a couch anymore. And I turned all of this research that I had been doing into brain hacks, simple brain hacks that I used to help get. When my brain said it was impossible, when people in white coats said it was impossible, I turned to these brain hacks. And John, I ended up showing up so successfully that I became a national outreach director for voter registration, registered about 485,000 voters. I was recruited to be the Get Out the Vote director for the California National Organization for Women, had the amazing opportunity to work with women activists and candidates. And that's where I saw what was happening to women in civic and elected spaces. And trauma has a big T and a little t, but it was rampant. So women, amazing, brilliant, capable women, couldn't see themselves as candidates for office, whereas their male counterparts would self-select in. And when they step into public service, the amount of hatred and pushback was very disproportionate. And Facebook in 2020 tracked that female candidates got up to 10 times more harassment and hate speech. When I started looking into this, the women I was talking to about the brain hacks that I thought might help, right? Step out of your comfort zone and go for your ambition, and also protect your nervous system when people are dysregulating you. They kept saying, John, I wish I knew this in high school. And when I looked into it, high school is the last time boys and girls think they can run for office equally. So democracy was born. We are a civic leadership training program. And for every public policy skill we teach, we match it with an evidence-based neuroscience skill to overcome the barriers in women's leadership's paths, and especially elected office.
That's an amazing backstory. Fantastic that you made it all the way from your world to the adult world into the high school world. And it's paid off. And that makes a lot of sense. I mentioned when we started our prep work as father of two adult women, high school was definitely a time when they could have pivoted one way or the other. So I applaud that you've brought it down to that early stage, if you will. So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see, I'll call it traditional leadership programs, make when trying to take a traditional approach to preparing the young women we're talking about for positions of power?
I would say it's the difference between inspiration and persistence. And part of what I mean by that is our prefrontal cortex is where we're aware of our thoughts, our rational thoughts, and we tend to think that's our brain. That's when people say, you can do it. Go for it. The world is your oyster. Those are all prefrontal cortex statements. And that woman gets excited and she goes out into the world to make her mark. And over, women are heartbroken, discouraged, burned out, exhausted by the tiny slights that come their way, the bigger slights that come their way. They amplify across any intersectional identity. And you can lose people out of the leadership pipeline because it just gets so exhausting and difficult. Those skills track to a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is our fight, flight, freeze part of the brain and the whole limbic system. So when someone makes a hurtful comment, your amygdala lights up, the fight, flight, freeze part. There's a threat. And when you get triggered over and over, that can be exhausting. And so I think where we make a mistake is we lean into the prefrontal cortex skills of inspiration, of practical training, of encouragement, but not the amygdala skills for what do you do if somebody says something hurtful that makes you feel sad and ultimately makes you feel exhausted to keep stepping back into a space that isn't supporting you. Why don't we teach amygdala skills for walking into a room that doesn't look like you at all, which triggers the amygdala, right? And makes you cautious and hesitant and avoidant and all the things that an amygdala can be when it doesn't feel safe. So I think to really set women up for success, and you said it, we need to make their whole brain their ally. So for every prefrontal cortex, inspiration, talent, skill, we need to match it with an amygdala skill that keeps women moving forward when things get hard.
Well, makes sense. So how do we do that? How do we shift, let's say if we're dealing with high school kids, how do we help the parents adopt or better support their daughter as they step out of this comfort zone to take on these leadership roles?
Yeah. So I would say a parent for a teenage girl, I would love them to teach the teenage girl one of our skills. And that skill is called inner best friend. So we are all very aware of the inner critic who chimes in and says, it's not your turn. It's not your time. This isn't going to work. She is a survival voice, and it's very hard to shift her because she thinks she's keeping you alive. However, if you resource an ally, you can get access to a different voice. And that is what I call your inner best friend. And what we teach the girls, my two inner best friends are Barack Obama and my puppy dog, Branch. So before, for example, I'm coming on a podcast, my inner critic says, you're not going to say it well enough. You're not going to represent democracy. She says all the things, right? And then we say, thank you so much. I appreciate you chiming in. I'm going to go ask Barack Obama what he would say to me. And he says, change is made by being brave. Change is made by showing up and saying what you believe. And so we ask the girls over and over, what would your inner best friend say here? We identify the inner critic. What would your inner best friend say? So for parents, an inner best friend for your child, if you introduce this concept, can be anybody. It can be somebody real. It can be you. It can be an imaginary person. It can be a political person. It can be an actress. It can be a cartoon character. Anyone who makes you feel valued, seen, and heard. So that when the inner critic comes in, you can name the inner critic and start learning to ask yourself, what would my inner best friend say to me right? Because that voice says, your voice matters. What you have to say is important. If you try, what's the harm? And so teaching people to start to access that. And I actually, because I'm so passionate about inner best friend, I started an Instagram page called Inner Best Friend. So if you'd like some tips, please check it out. But it's an easy concept for high schoolers to get. And that's what I would recommend.
This sounds like, to me, you go through a definite sort of mindfulness process in any situation, whatever it happens to be at the time. Am I understanding that correctly? So you sit down, as you said, to prepare for the podcast, and the one side tells you all the stuff you should be worried about, but then your inner best friend tells you all the reasons why you're going to do a great job. And I take it, you teach people how to sort of walk through that, I'll call it mental exercise, for lack of a better word. Am I articulating that correctly?
You're articulating it perfectly. There are a lot of skills, for example, like grounding, which is something where, John, if you just ask yourself to notice making physical contact with a solid surface, your nervous system will start to settle. Your nerves will start to settle. So we often teach democracy girls before they're going to do anything nerve-wracking, because I think a lot about inflection moments where women opt out. So in the inflection moment, when you're going to make a speech, you're going to run for office, you're going to step into a leadership position, and you're hesitating to first ground. That's the evidence-based practice. We ground on Mother Earth, our first feminist, who is always beneath your feet wherever you go. And then we ask the girls to ask what their inner best friend would say about their right to do this. So we have a 10-week program, a 1-day program, and a self-directed program. And over, before you advocate for issue, before you make a campaign speech, before you do mock Congress, before you call your representative, before you learn how to take action in your local community, you notice the nerves coming up. And we say, if there are nerves, can you put a heart on your screen? Because we're online, because we're in 42 states. And the screen fills with hearts, because everybody gets nervous, but we think we're the only one. We think everyone else has got it together. So we need to see the heart, that everybody feels this. And then we say, but we know what to do. We ground and we check in with our inner best friend. And there are some other skills too, but those are two that we repeat over and over. And I have girls coming back to me and saying, before I take a test, I ground and go for inner best friend. Before I get my driver's license, before I take an AP, before I think about a reach college that I think there's no chance that I have to get into, I ground and I check with my inner best friend. And one of the things we ask our graduates is, did democracy teach you skills that helped you do things you were too afraid to do before regime? And 92% say yes. And that it runs the gamut of what that is for young women, because every young woman is unique, but it's something she wouldn't have done before. And that is one of the critical steps of a leader, is to notice you're afraid and do it anyway.
A lot of things are running around in my head right now. This is pretty interesting. So that's a great statistic. And I would imagine that, of course, like everything else in life, you do it once or twice or 3 times, and then the 4th and 5th and 6th time get easier and easier. And so I'm guessing that if you catch people in high school, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, you're starting to help them just become better leaders in school, better students, more confident in whatever they're participating in, whether it be academics or sports or whatever. I'm assuming part of this process is helping them figure out who their inner friend is, right? And to me, that would be a big part of okay, what should this person look like? Or like you said, should it be my dog or should it be something else? It's fascinating. So tell me a little bit about how the programming works. I didn't mention this up front, but you're not-for-profit, 501c3 in the United States. So I'm assuming you have some programming that you offer as part of the organization. As you said, it's geared to high school kids. Give me a little bit of background on how it works for our audience.
So there are a couple of key aspects. One is I'm in Los Angeles. There are a lot of places in our country where there isn't a lot of programming that looks like this around young people. So one of my commitments was to reach every girl, even if she doesn't have parents around who can drive her somewhere or she's not in a location that supports this kind of training. So we are an online program where girls open their phone, they open their computer, and they connect to skills in a supportive sisterhood. One of the things we do is we pay a stipend. So working in politics, a lot of early political pipeline opportunities are unpaid internships because campaigns can't afford to pay their interns. But what that means is these kind of critical early experiences in our democracy are only for people who can afford unpaid. And if we truly want America to reflect all of her people, we need to make sure we're lifting these barriers to entry. So we pay every democracy student a stipend so that money, income is never a barrier to knowing that your voice matters, you have worth and value, and you belong in our democracy specifically. And then the last piece of our programming is the girls that go through the program come back and lead it. So you get the training of being a leader, and then you get the experience of being a leader. And also at the developmental stage of high school, peer-to-peer is much more effective than adult to young person. So having a fellow high school girl or college girl explain who her best friend is, inner best friend is, how she uses it, right? How she has stepped up in civic spaces around. It's so meaningful because right now, women are not adequately represented. And certainly the radiant spectrum that makes up women is not adequately represented. And there's a great saying, you can't be what you can't see. So our girls can immediately see it because girls that look just like them are leading the program and sharing their triumphs and sharing how they use these skills and sharing how they have stepped up. So it's building immediate peer mentorship into the model and is just a way you can either tell young women you believe in them or you can show them by handing over a workshop and all the breakout rooms and running the whole thing and saying, however this translates through your radiant self is exactly how it was meant to go. I drill them in the science, right? Because there are certain things that are evidence-based that we can't change. And a lot of it is just the girls sharing their personal experiences. And so those are the key components that make up the workshops. And then there are the 10-week one. I was mentioning this before, but there's a lot of public speaking. We want girls to get really comfortable public speaking and practice the evidence-based practices with public speaking because that's such a big part of being a leader. So they have tons of opportunities. They advocate for issues based on their own lived experience. They advocate for issues based on other people's lived experience. They talk about the issues that they care about and are working on. They do make a campaign speech where they decide what to run for and they run for it. They learn what are the mechanisms for immediately getting involved in your local community in a civic capacity so they can step immediately out into action. And then we culminate with calling our representatives, because this is often for that generation the first time they realize that representatives work for them and their voice matters. And often it's the first time they check out that representative's website and whether or not they agree with them. And then finally, we have a mock Congress where girls propose and co-sponsor bills with a yes and model. So yes, this is the part that I agree with. And this is what I would like to add or change. right? We talk about a thought experiment. It can't be different until we imagine it different. So we're not looking for just debate and tearing each other apart. We're looking how we build. How can we say yes? And you are allowed to say no. And we say yes and build national bills that reflect the diverse lived experience of girls across the country.
It's amazing. We talked in advance, but I didn't quite understand it fully. And I really like what you're doing. And just in general for humanity. Some of the takeaways I just heard, and you answered my last question before I asked it, which is great. But I love the idea of giving them the stipend, which makes them feel like they're worth something. You always say you get what you pay for. So if I'm doing free work, sometimes people undervalue it. So helping them just feel good about earning some money by doing some work, I think is unbelievable. And I also love the idea of the whole peer-to-peer training because, again, having two daughters, there was a point in time where it didn't matter what mom and dad said, they weren't going to listen, right? Eventually they came back, but they were adults then. So I think the idea accomplishes twofold. One, the more you do it, the better you get. So if I come back as a trainer and train people, then I'm going to reinforce what I learned originally. But also, like you said, a ninth grader is going to look up to a senior or a freshman in college way more than they would an adult. My question would have been, what's your unique disruptive technique? So that was what I felt is one of your unique disruptive techniques. Well, we want to wrap it up because we've taken some time. You've made some amazingly great points. I think this is a fantastic not-for-profit organization. I get jazzed up when I talk to people that are doing really cool things around the world, and certainly here in the United States. We talked about your Instagram account. How else can people learn more about what you do and your service and implement your programming in their world?
Absolutely. Our website is democracy.org. There is an application process on the website. We currently get 7 times more applications than we have spots for, which is a great problem to have. And also you can reach me on LinkedIn. If you have any ideas or want to know more about how to bring this to your community or get some of your young people involved, please reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And of course, we'll have links and all the details so people can easily find you. We'll also promote the show on LinkedIn as well. Hopefully we'll be able to get you some good candidates and maybe some supporters for financial donation support to help your cause. Sarah, this has been super rich conversation. I really enjoyed it. Before we wrap up, I always like to give the guest the last word. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to share?
I would only say, I think part of what is disruptive about our work is that we lean into radical hope and radical joy and radical love and continue to believe that every human being has worth and value in their unique selves. And I think we hold that and we train that and we build that into civic and elected spaces. And I think sometimes as we look around today, we can feel far away from radical hope and radical joy and radical love. And I think sometimes it's a choice. And we choose to believe it, and we choose to incubate it, and we choose to train it, because I do see an America that has never yet been, but absolutely could be.
Said, I'm going to leave it at that, and definitely something we all should strive for. So those are great comments. I'm going to wrap it up. Again, I'm John Kuntz. Thanks for joining us in this edition of the Disruptor Podcast. Have a great day.